right, we are going to review for our test by completing a study guide, and we're also going to do something called tagging our journal. So the first thing you're going to do is put your heading in the top right corner. You'll notice that it says that there's a place here for your parent to sign saying that you completed this study guide. You'll need to do that tonight. Then you'll upload a picture that is clear, easy to see, not hazy, using your Chromebook camera, and that will count for 5 extra points on the test. The test is Thursday. You will need to bring this completed for tomorrow's class. That way, if you have any questions, you can ask them in class. We'll also be doing either a quizzes or a Kahoot kind of game to review. So we're going to start by tagging our journal. So in your journal, you should have your name, and this is ready to go in case I get a new student, but you should have your name written in there. On page 1, you should have your safety contract written out. We'll glue that after the test. There's nothing on the test that covers anything in the safety contract. On page 2, however, we do need information on page 2. So with your highlighter, we're going to tag that you need to be able to define biotic and abiotic. You need to be able to give me some examples, which on yours you should have some things like lion and deer, and over here you should have things like rock and air and water. And so everything on our planet, in our world, can be divided into either abiotic factors or biotic factors. And those biotic factors, we said, are all made of cells. And we are going to further classify on the biotic side that those cells can either be prokaryotic or eukaryotic, and they have particular characteristics that you need to know. So we're going to create another little T-chart, and we know that prokaryotic cells have no nucleus, but they do have DNA. It's just that DNA is floating around in the cytoplasm. And it's because they're very simple, meaning they are unicellular. All prokaryotes are unicellular. Now, not everything that's unicellular is a prokaryote, and so you will find there are some eukaryotic cells, such as protistas, that are unicellular. Eukaryotic means it has a nucleus, and in that nucleus is where we find the DNA. Now, eukaryotic cells can be unicellular, or they can be multicellular. So we're going to add that to page 2, and then we're going to tag it or highlight. Prokaryotic, no nucleus, always unicellular. Eukaryotic has a nucleus. Okay, those are the main things you need to know about that. On to page 3, you will have the letter E lab. We'll glue that in after the test. There won't be anything on the test about how to use a microscope or that letter E lab. So when we go to page 4, you've got 4 and 5. These are the characteristics of life. And so we're going to start off with our highlight, tagging homeostasis. You need to know that word. You need to know that it means to maintain a stable state of being. And we're going to add that sometimes you'll hear that called balance, maintaining a balance in your organism. All living things maintain homeostasis. All living things are made of cells. At least one cell. We say unicellular is one cell, multicellular is more than one cell. All living things have DNA. It's just where it's located that differs. In a eukaryote, it's in the nucleus. In a prokaryote, it's in the cytoplasm. All living things grow and develop. More characteristics of life. All living things have to be able to respond to their environment. They have to be able to reproduce. You don't have to know the 2 types. We'll talk more about those in a later unit. You do need to know that how an organism obtains energy is a classification, so we're going to add the word autotroph and heterotroph. Now, an autotroph makes its own food, and that process is called photosynthesis. And then heterotrophs, of course, like us, have to consume other organisms in order to get energy. And so you need to know the term autotroph and what it means. You need to know the term heterotroph and what it means. Your lower level vocabulary was producer and consumer. We've moved on. We're on autotroph and heterotroph, but it means the same thing. And then also all living things have to be able to evolve or change. On to page 6. Again, microscope parts and how to use it won't be on the test, but there is a place there that you're going to glue, after the test, you'll glue your quiz about the microscope. On page 7, cell theory. You need to know about cell theory. You need to know the main components or parts of cell theory. There are 3 of them. They don't have to be in any particular order. We do need to add the scientist that contributed or were involved in this development of cell theory. So the main ones, we're going to start off with Hooke. And so Hooke was the one that looked under a microscope and looked through a microscope and saw boxes when he was looking at some dead cork or dead cells, and those boxes reminded him of the little square rooms that the monks lived in, and so he named them cells because that's what the monks called their little square rooms, and that's what he saw under the microscope were little squares. He was seeing a plant cell. Next we had Leeuwenhoek, who made his own microscope, and when he looked at some scrapings from his teeth, he actually saw the first living cells that were seen under a microscope. These were actually bacteria cells. Next we have Schleiden, who was a botanist, a German botanist, and he was looking at plants underneath a microscope, and he noticed that all plants are made of cells. Next we have Schwann. He noticed that all animals are made of cell, and Schwann, the name Schwann, kind of reminds us of a swan. So we're going to draw a little picture of that. That's to remember Schwann made the observation of animals, Schleiden made the observation of plants. And finally, Virchow was the one, although he kind of stole some of this data and observations, he did actually tell Schleiden and Schwann that all cells come from other or pre-existing cells. Now you'll notice we have a star beside Schleiden and Schwann. That's because they actually wrote cell theory. So they wrote cell theory, these 2 guys. You'll remember all of these from the crossword that we did. So you'll need to tag scientists. You're going to need to know all of them. Turning to page 8, we have our 6 kingdoms as archaebacteria, eubacteria, fungi, plants, animals, and protists. You need to also write in the word unicellular under cellular. There we go, cellular. Under prokaryote, and you need to highlight that protistas are also unicellular. Animalia is always a heterotroph. Plants are always autotrophs. Fungi are always heterotrophs. The other 3 can be one or the other. A lot of times kids think only plants are autotrophs, but there are other groupings, protistas and bacteria, that can also be autotrophs. On to page 9, you're going to need to be able to define taxonomy. You need to know Linnaeus was the one that came up with this classification system, and he just said plants or animals. Now we actually have more categories. We actually have 3 domains. They're archaebacteria, bacteria, and eukaryote. Again, archaebacteria and bacteria are both prokaryotic, no nucleus, and eukaryotic has a nucleus. That's probably the 5th time I've said that, so it's probably pretty important. Let's add eubacteria on there. And then you need to know the taxonomy. The largest group, of course, is the domain. The smallest group is the species. All right, now we're going to look at the back of your study guide, and we're going to use page 8 to complete this. So when we look at archaebacteria and you look on your chart, you'll notice that it is a prokaryote and it is unicellular, and it can be both autotroph or a heterotroph, not individually, but some of them are autotrophs, some of them are heterotrophs. And these are your extremophiles, the ones that live in extreme environments. One example is I gotta look how to spell it, Thermoproteus. Looking at eubacteria, you'll find they're prokaryotic, they're unicellular, they can be either an autotroph or a heterotroph, and these are everyday bacteria. You hear about them on the news, like E. coli or staph, or like Staphylococcus. Next is the Protista, which is a member of the eukaryotic group, and it is unicellular, so it's the only eukaryote that's always unicellular. It can be either an autotroph or a heterotroph. Some examples are Paramecium, which are heterotrophs, and algae, which is an autotroph. A lot of times people think algae is a plant, and it used to be classified as a plant back in the 1700s when everything was either a plant or an animal, but then they changed part of the plant's characteristics were not quite the same, so they created the Protista category. Next we have fungi. And fungi are eukaryotic, multicellular, they're always heterotrophs, and they are mushrooms. They happen to be decomposers, but that is a heterotroph. Plants are eukaryotic, multicellular. They're the only one that's all characteristics are all autotrophs, and an example is a sunflower. And then Animalia is your eukaryote, multicellular, always heterotrophs, and humans and insects and a lot of other things are animals. So let's take a look at the front. I'm going to tell you about ecosystems. Draw your arrows. These are divided into 2 parts. You've got abiotic and biotic. Abiotic is not made of cells. Biotic is made of cells. All cells can be either eukaryotes or prokaryotes. This is where your 6 kingdoms go. There are 4 kingdoms that are eukaryotic and 2 that are prokaryotic. Look on page 8 to find those answers and look them up. Here's where you can find your definitions. Page 2 for the first 4, and then page 4 and 5, and page 8 for autotroph, page 4 and 5 for heterotroph. And on to the next page. You can find all of these scientists on page 7 and page 9. Cell theory is on page 9. All of these can be classified as either abiotic or biotic. We had some practice at that, but these, you can find those definitions on page 2. Characteristics of life are on page 4 and 5. All of the levels of taxonomy are on page 9. And then we have 2 sort of essay or 1-sentence questions. It says, give an example of an abiotic factor affecting a biotic. So that might be if there's a drought, which climate would be abiotic, and it causes all of the grass to die. The grass is biotic. A little bit harder one, a biotic factor affecting abiotic. Let's say you have an animal, which is biotic, and it dies. It's still biotic. And then it decomposes and decays into the soil. The soil is abiotic, but that decaying animal causes the soil to be rich in nutrients like carbon and nitrogen, and so makes it a better place for things to grow. That would be an biotic affecting abiotic.